Welcome back, and it's great to be chatting with you again.
You too. We've been doing this for a long time.
We have several years now, over a decade for each of us, not to date
Yeah.
ourselves. Of course, the occasion for our conversation today is the launch of the newest edition of your book, The Law School Admission Game: Play Like an Expert. So, congratulations on the launch.
Thank you. I can't believe it's been 15 years since the first edition, but it's amazing to me how every couple years there's something new to write about. And this year that was definitely the case.
Yeah, of course. The only constant in the law school admission world is change, right? So, a lot of changes in recent years since you had the last edition. Most notably, perhaps, is the Supreme Court ruling on affirmative action last year. So, I'm wondering, just in your analysis, how has that impacted law school admissions in particular?
I think the number one way we've seen it is the impact on law school applications themselves so far. Remembering that we're still in the first cycle since the decision was made. So we don't have final numbers yet from the law schools to see how it's changed who they've taken and what the entrance numbers are. However, what we do know is that immediate changes were made to what was expected of applicants when applying. Many more schools asked for optional essays, or even, for example, like Harvard required a second diverse perspective essay. And I think that is the wave of the future, more and more and more essays, honestly, because it allows the law schools to try to find more things about you in a holistic way and sneak in some of those diversity factors in a more holistic way. I also think the trend of interviewing, especially because the Kira interview style is so accessible to law schools and to applicants, that will continue to play and has played this year and will continue to play a bigger role. It's been a slower admission cycle this cycle, and I think a lot of that is because of the Supreme Court decision. Applications are taking longer to review and they're taking longer to complete. And we're going to see how this ends up shaking out. We'll know this summer, really, once we see how waitlists have moved. But it's definitely a big change. I think what we will see in the end is that 25th and 75th percentile numbers at law schools will get smaller in range because fewer exceptions will be allowed to be made for people, and schools know they'll be sued if there's a trend of the 25th percentile being completely people who used to be quote unquote affirmative action admittees. So I think we're going to see some changes.
Well, so those are a lot of changes. Okay, so let me just run through a couple of those. So one is that you said, of course, schools have added more essays to their applications. That's more work for the applicant and more work for the schools to review. From the school side, it means it takes longer to hear back from them, longer wait periods, which of course can be frustrating and stressful.
Yeah.
But then when it comes to creating the applications, a lot more work for the applicant. So
Absolutely. I've seen that. I used to give people, when I'm working with my clients and setting them up on timelines, I used to give them 3 weeks from the day that we would start applying to the day we would finish applying. And now I give 6 weeks. That's how long it's taking.
double the time and
Yeah,
maybe
absolutely.
double the work or more.
Absolutely. It's almost no matter where they're applying, what level of schools. It's not just the T14s that have all these additional essays anymore. Now everywhere from Syracuse has, why Syracuse? Everybody's adding this in as part of their application, and it is definitely taking applicants longer to do quality work.
Yeah, I mean, to what extent is it possible or easy to reuse an essay for another school's application? I know it used to be a lot more common,
Yeah,
unique.
I I think that for personal statements, they can largely be the same for pretty much every school with slight tweaks depending on school's prompts. As you know, I'm not someone who believes you necessarily change your personal statement for different schools unless the school asks you to do so. But for the optional essays, the diverse perspective statement, if you have an obstacles overcome story, will remain largely unchanged. But you need to read the prompt to see whether a story about family history would still apply to the prompt. A story about um, your own experiences will apply. You have to kind of check each school because your story might work for some and not for others. So I do think it's something you can't take for granted that your essays will automatically work for every school, and the lengths are all different. Some people want, YSMU is 2 paragraphs. Another school wants 2 full pages on why they're law school. You need to look at things like UNC wants you to call it topic 1 and topic 2 and topic 3 and not diverse perspective essay and personal statement. And I think The problem isn't so much that I think there's a lot of laziness when people apply and they're not really checking those things, which is one of the major things that law schools are looking for. Did you follow directions? That is all that law, that is what you do as a lawyer, right? If the court says submit a 10-page brief, it better be a 10-page brief in the font the court says. And I think that people overlook the importance of some of that.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's a major red flag, and I'm sure it's very obvious to the school if someone is not adhering to a length requirement.
Absolutely.
Yeah. You mentioned Kira interviews. For those who
Yes.
aren't familiar, can you just break
Sure.
down what is Kira? What are these
Kira
interviews
is
like?
absolutely. Kira is a brand name of an online interview company. And basically, a lot of law schools have adopted this process because it kind of randomly generates question type and questions that are of certain types. And you get a minute to respond, which I think is the challenging part for most people. And you record it on your own time. You do get a little bit of a moment to practice or collect your thoughts, but these questions are usually grouped into three categories. One will always be a why law, why this school category, legal career, what do you see yourself doing kinds of questions. One bucket will always be behavioral kinds of situational questions. So tell us about a time that you failed. Tell us about a regret. Tell us about a time you worked as part of a diverse team and what your role was on that team. Things like that. And then there's usually a bucket for those typical interview questions, like it could be anything from, how would you advise the president on this policy issue, or would you advise compulsory voting? To, what's another good example? Tell us your best and least favorite class you've ever taken, or it's more typical interview things. What's something we don't already know about you that you'd like to share? So a couple of schools also incorporate a written response, a 5-minute written response. It's not something you have to prepare for. But generally, those are the buckets. And so many schools are now incorporating this. And I anticipate more will do so. First of all, it's a way for you to show interest. If you don't do the optional interview, why should they admit you, right? If you can't go to the trouble of doing it. And I also think that it's a little bit of a crazy check. Make sure the person is who they present themselves as being. Make sure that socially people can communicate, since that is a big part of lawyering, law school, et cetera. And it's another good way for law schools to get a sense of whether you're a good fit and whether their suspicions about you, good, bad, were correct. Oh, I thought this was a great applicant. How do they present? Oh, I thought this was a crappy applicant. How do they present? It's kind of to see all of that.
That's a lot, though. I mean, a lot of these questions, you said 1 minute typically for these videos, and then
yes,
that 5-minute essay, which seems a little bit like the LSAT writing sample to some extent, because they're documenting your writing performance.
Yeah.
But for these videos, how are you supposed to prepare for this? Obviously you have the standard questions, which you can expect, but then the curveballs, what are they looking for, and how do you get ready for that sort of thing?
Well, I think it's very similar to preparing for the personal statement. I think that you revisit your experiences and come up with kind of a list in your head of, when was the last time I worked as part of a group project? Or when was the last time that something didn't work out how I wanted? Just start to cultivate some of these stories in your head. Not that they're memorized and at the ready, but so you've thought about it. You kind of have something on the tip of your tongue, and you've thought about what your strengths and weaknesses are and what some things are that you can point to demonstrate them, right? But I also think actually doing research on the school is number one. You're going to get a why Texas law question. Why wouldn't you research why the hell you'd go to Austin if you live in Omaha? You have to share these things. I think that people waste words a lot, and that's very true in personal statements and other essays as well. I see so much waste, too much introductory language, too much conclusory language. Get to the meat, and especially when you only have 60 seconds to respond. So what I think is great practice is just spend a week, whenever anyone asks you a question, answering it in a minute or less. Like you're at a cocktail party and someone says, what do you do? Or how are you? Or tell me about your family? Do it in a minute or less. Just get it out. And I think you'll see it's such a more effective way of communicating.
And imagine if you do some dry runs or practice runs of this, then it'll be a lot easier when you're actually in that moment.
Absolutely. I do this with clients all the time. We go through these practice runs and we kind of edit the responses and I give feedback. I think that the time pressure freaks a lot of people out, but I actually think it's awesome because it lets you think about 1 or 2 points you'd like to make and get out. Lets you think about, well, what are my 2 most important things then? If I have to only pick 2 things about why I would want to go to Cornell Law School. What would they be? And then you tend to see, oh, it's kind of stupid for me to say this is a top-ranked legal program in New York because they know that, it lets you actually think about what is important to share.
Right. That makes sense. A couple questions for you on presentation. So aside from the content of what you're saying, how should people dress for these? And is it okay to do it on your phone?
I think the phone is fine. I think the thing is that my ring light fell off. We had a big presentation just a few minutes ago with you and I, where my ring light fell off. Don't let that happen during the interviews. Set up your ring light so that the tripod is stable. You don't need to be in a suit anymore in this post-COVID reality, but I do think something presentable is good. I wouldn't, I think that, a collared shirt, sweater, something that's very simple is perfectly fine. No distracting background, no noise, no parents knocking on your door, no kids coming through, kind of a thing. But I think that we've come to a place in society where it's okay to be casual. You don't need to be in a business suit. Doesn't need to look like you have a bookshelf behind you. But just be in a place that's quiet and well lit. Make sure that the framing is good. I see people do a lot of this or this, and make sure that the camera's at the right height, that it's showing the right parts of you, that kind of thing.
Okay, yeah, so that's also something you could simulate beforehand, right? You could just open up
if
your
you
webcam
don't practice it beforehand, that would be just idiotic, right? I mean, I think this interview demonstrates that. I'm not where I usually would do this. The lighting's off. My dog was barking. You don't want any of that when you do your interview.
It's okay though, casual.
Right.
You have, but yeah, of course, you can schedule when you're going to do the Kira, right? Of course.
Right.
So one other question for you about changes just in the admissions world recently. I know that hybrid programs have become a lot more popular. The ABA seems to have loosened some of the restrictions and regulations around that. What's the landscape like right now? And do you recommend doing a hybrid program?
I have some clients who call me and have no idea that hybrid programs exist now, who I know are perfect for it. And those are usually people who have families and careers already. They are in locations where there's not a law school really nearby for them to go to. They don't really want to pick up and move far away. And also some of these programs seem to be much more flexible with LSAT requirements than they are with their day programs. We don't have a lot of data to support that yet, but what I'm seeing so far, that's the case on an anecdotal basis for individual clients that I've had do that this year. I think that these programs are really meant for that kind of an applicant who is kind of interrupting their real life to add law school into it. And they're great options. I don't think this is the wave of the future. I don't think all law school will be this way. I don't think everyone should do law school this way. But if you are someone who has responsibilities that don't allow you the same kind of freedom, just pick a move and move somewhere for 3 years. I think that this is a really exciting thing to know about.
Yeah, I think it is pretty exciting. I mean, I agree with you that probably there's something core about the in-person law school experience, being in the classroom, forming those relationships. But for some folks, just through their life circumstances, online is really appealing. Now, whenever I see this question pop up on forums and whatnot, there's always a ton of interest and people are like, oh my God, I didn't know this existed. Then they hear that St. Mary's, for example, has only a couple dozen seats available. So I'm wondering, how competitive is it to get into one of these programs?
So let's talk about that. These programs are new. The law schools are launching something new. So they're not going to launch it with 300 people. They're going to launch it to make sure they have it under control, that it's going to work well, that they know what they're doing, right? And so these programs are going to start small. That's why, we haven't talked about JD next, which I'm sure is a favorite topic of yours, but these things are going to start small. These are not things that are all of a sudden going to take over law school admissions, like GRE admissions, and take over law school admissions. Law schools are testing it out. They're going to start small. They're going to take some people, see how it works. They're going to see how they operate with this. What are the results? Are these people passing the bar exam? Are these people hurting their career statistics? This is going to start small. And then I think 3-4 years from now, when there's a test group that has proven itself, more people would be admitted this way.
Right. That
but
makes
it's not so much the programs are selective. It's more the schools are being cautious, which is the right thing to do whenever you start something new and you're not sure how it's going to work or how many bugs there will be. The last thing you want to do is admit 100 people to a class in an experimental program, have it not work, have all these people transfer out, have the reputation of the program be crap, right? You don't want that when you're in charge of the new hybrid program at a law school. You want to start small, make sure it works, make sure people are happy, and then move on with the next cohort. And so we're in that phase of it, just like we're in that phase where JD Next, which is being presented as an alternative to standardized testing, that you can take a class and take an exam on a law-related topic through JD Next at Aspen Publishing, and law schools will, some law schools have announced they'll consider that. But we have to remember it's a very small group of law schools that are doing it. We don't know how many people they will try to take through the program. The other thing to keep in mind, and this isn't exactly what you asked me, but since I'm on the tangent, is if you've taken an LSAT, you're an LSAT applicant. I really think we're not all in our emphasizing that enough. If you take the LSAT and go, I'm really bad at the LSAT, I think I'll take the GRE, you are an LSAT applicant. If you have an LSAT on record, that is what the law schools are going to rely on to make their admission decision. If you have a 139 LSAT, you're like, oh, I'm bad at that, I'm going to take the JD Next. The LSAT is the thing that law schools are going to look at and say, this is how you're going to compare with other law school applicants. This is how you're going to compare with other law students. And this is how you're going to compare with our student body. They're not going to say, oh, okay, let's throw that out. Let's look at something unproven. They're going to go with what's proven. So if you really don't want to take a standardized test, and you have to lean into what your decision is. You have to lean into your GRE decision, lean into your LSAT decision, or lean into your JD Next decision. But once you've taken the LSAT, you're an LSAT candidate.
Exactly. I mean, I'm pretty sure that once you have an LSAT on record, it's going to the ABA.
You can't hide it.
Yeah, it's going in.
Yeah, it's your candidacy, and it's what and law schools have to report it to the ABA. So they can't hide it. You can't hide it. So I think a lot of people are talking about, oh, well, I'll see which I do better on. This is not like college where you take the ACT, SAT, or choose not to report your score. This is not college. Mm-hmm. That is not the landscape for law school admissions.
Yeah, everything gets reported. Everything gets reported. Yeah. And these schools are, as you said, they're very cautious. They don't want to risk disastrous bar passage rates. They don't want to risk losing their ABA accreditation. And they're going to try and see. And I would imagine that in the short term, with an exam like JD Next, somebody who gets in with that, because it's so experimental, that's going to be a really strong candidate in a lot of other areas of their application.
They're going to have everything else. So I think people who follow my work know I'm not an elitist by any stretch of the imagination. Okay. I think for those clients that I work with who go to Harvard, Yale, Stanford, that's awesome for them. And that's what they want, and that's where they should be. And I have clients who are just thrilled to go to California Western or New York Law School. And that's just as awesome for those candidates. So I'm not an elitist by any stretch, but I do think at the lower end of the LSAT spectrum, you have a lot more people who don't really understand what we're talking about now, and how important it is that, if you have a low GPA, if your resume is kind of lackluster, if you have a lot of character and fitness issues in your background, and you have a low test score, or you take JD Next, the JD Next isn't going to push up all the other things. You know what I'm saying? So if you're a strong candidate in every other way, and you just happen to know the standardized test is not your thing, and this is something you'd like to try, you're probably the perfect candidate to try it.
Yeah. Yeah. And the JD Next, by the way, is still kind of on shaky ground to begin with. We'll see what happens. Yeah. But the ABA really tore it apart in their most recent evaluation. So, of course, they're going to come back with a response on that. And I think it's one of those things that'll kind of muddle along for a couple of years. She says the LSAT, ABA going LSAT optional or test optional is going to take a couple of years. They keep pushing that back. But it's you can't assume that this is going to be the path for you if you don't like the LSAT.
Right. I also think, colleges are starting to go back to requiring standardized tests for admission. I got so lucky. Both my kids were COVID generation college applicants and didn't have to apply with standardized tests. But I think that is going by the wayside. I mean, not at University of California system, but other colleges are starting to say, okay, now we want to see test scores again. And so I think it would be very odd for LSAT to go away at a time when schools are starting to require these tests again. But it'll just give me fodder for the next book in 2 years. I don't know.
Exactly. Exactly. Of course. I mean, there's going to continue to be changes no matter what. Yeah. Any other big changes in the new edition from previous that you've seen in the past few years?
I think that I talk a lot more about optional essays in this because it is more important, more prevalent to face optional essays. I think that the importance of rolling admissions, we can all relax on a little bit. I think that this cycle has proven that there's not you. I used to say anything before Thanksgiving was early, but this year I think that stretched even further. I think that there's a strong group of applicants coming in through December that have gotten good results and are still hearing back. It's a really slow cycle. So it's a little bit to be determined, but I am seeing that a little bit more. And I think that the prevalence of interviews, I would say waitlist season is going to be interesting. Because law schools have taken longer to get back to people, they may have a better idea of their classes and how they are balanced. And so it'll be interesting. We'll know better come mid-July, whether waitlists will move more this year. I don't feel like schools have over admitted this year, which means I don't know, it'll be interesting. It'll be interesting to see, because it's always interesting. I would say that any year, but I think this year with a slower admission cycle, no affirmative action, and the optional essays and interviews, I think all of that's going to come into the mix. It'll be interesting to see what happens during waitlist season. And that's something I talk about in the book as well.
That's the funny thing, is that we're in late March right now, and there could still be plenty of waitlist movement over the next 3 to 4 months.
Yeah, it hasn't even started. I would say there's still going to be plenty of regular acceptance movement.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we're still normally at this time, I would say the cycle's over. We're done, other than waitlists. But I don't feel that way right now at all. I feel like we're still in the cycle itself. Usually every law school except maybe NYU and Stanford has gotten decisions out by now, but I don't know. I think it's going to be slower. And I think that I have a lot more in the book to talk to people about things they can do proactively after applying that we used to take for granted and not really emphasize, like visiting schools and things like that to show interest.
Right, of course.
Now that we're past the COVID thing of not going to visit schools, now we can visit schools again.
Exactly. And one other factor that comes to mind for me in terms of the slow nature of the cycle would be the ambiguity around the U.S. News rankings. Do you have any thoughts on how that might play a role? I hate to bring it up. I know that we're all sick of talking rankings.
So I'm not sick of talking about rankings. Look, my expertise is on getting people into law school. I've been doing that for almost 25 years. I started Law School Expert literally 20 years ago. Okay. It's all I've been doing full time ever since. I don't farm it out to other people. I do it. So my hands are in the muck, with the applicants. I'm not a data person, but here's what I can tell you about US News. The schools might say that they're not participating, but all of the data US News is using is public data. The law schools still benefit completely from the rankings. So they can say, oh, we're not sending the data, but they're still being ranked. So it's kind of, to me, just a lot of BS. I think that, US News has to sell website clicks. It's not even magazines anymore, right? It's website clicks, and they have to get people to their site. I think that I'm always skeptical about small or big changes in rankings from year to year, because I don't really think UC Irvine changes 12 spaces every year. I don't really think, and I use that as an example, but I don't think law schools are suddenly different law schools over a period of a year. I think that school applicants need to come up with what's important to them in a law school. And I always say it's 3.5 factors. Location, reputation, and price. And each applicant decides for themselves the importance of each of those 3. And the 4th is, area of specialization. And I kind of put that as a half, because for most applicants, it really doesn't matter an area of specialization. I'd say most applicants, and that these areas of specialization are marketing tools the law schools use. And even if you have a very specific area of interest in law and you go to a law school because they say they're good at that, then you have to understand you're going to go there and 100 kids in your class are all going to have the same interest and be fighting for the same clinic and the same journal and the same externship and what have you. So I'm not a big fan of that being as equal to the other 3 factors, but you have to have your own thing. Reputation ranking is an umbrella of the reputation factor. Okay. Reputation in your field, reputation in your location. You might know that you want to be in, I don't know, pick a random city. You want to be there. You want to be in Denver. So is it really worth it to go to University of Miami when you could go to University of Denver and make connections in the school, in the location where you want to practice? I mean, that's a huge factor for both reputation and location. And then you start to look at price. DU is always going to give you more money than Miami will, right? Like, these are the things that people need to think for themselves and not just follow groupthink about.
I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more. I think that the insignificant differences in number are a lot less important than what matters to you personally in terms of, I think, region in particular and scholarship money as well.
And I think that people who struggle with that, who struggle with listing which of those factors are important to them, are often the people who are going to law school because they think it sounds good, or because someone else is pressuring them to go to law school, or it just, they want to be impressive to other people. They're the people I used to call the sweatshirt wearers. I'm only going to law school if I can wear the Georgetown sweatshirt when I go, kind of a thing. And I think that's a terrible reason to go to law school. Horrible reason to go to law school. I've always said that. I'll say it again. It's still a thing. And so I think if you can't enumerate how important those things are to you and all you care about is ranking, I think there's some soul searching that needs to be done. But someone hearing the person that I'm talking to when I say this isn't going to hear me say it. It's not going to land, but I'll say it anyway.
No, of course, some people have to learn the lesson the hard way, but you want to really take a good hard look that you're taking on. What's the timeline you're going to be paying it off over? And what are the employment outcomes associated with a given school? And what's the value proposition given how much you're paying?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I'm also someone who's never been just a means to an end kind of person. Like, you have to look at, how do you want to grow during law school? Is that important to you? Do you want to be among people who are really intellectually curious? Do you want to be among non-traditional people who've had careers? Do you want to, there's a lot to be said for those aspects. Going back to when we were talking earlier about the camaraderie that you might miss out on a hybrid, I don't know if that's still true. And I've had some personal experience with that. I'm taking a class online currently where we're all in a WhatsApp group and we on Zoom, and you feel this affinity for people and like it's part of a group. And I think that you don't necessarily lose that when you go online, especially if there's some in-person contact. And I think it's really, but I think camaraderie or being part of a group or who you're going to be part of, these are the connections you're going to make for the rest of your career. And so I think that it can't just be a numbers game, even if it's your own numbers game of what's important to you in terms of career outcomes and salary and all of that. I think you really have to look at this like this is something you're going to be attached to for the rest of your life, is the name of that school, that culture, and those individuals.
Right. And that's why, like, for example, visiting the school could be really important. And that's possible once again, luckily, so you can feel out what the culture is going to be like.
Yeah. I had someone just recently who was sure that Northeastern was her favorite school ever. Right. And then she went to see Suffolk and she was like, oh, actually, I kind of like this better. This is kind of more my vibe. And I mean, that's a really good exercise, right? Likewise, you could think a school's your number one and then go there and realize, oh, I'm less attached to this. Maybe that scholarship to that other school down the street is interesting to me. I felt appreciated there. I felt like they saw me as a human being there. I think that those are the intangibles you only get by going and talking to people.
Exactly. Well, Anne, this was such a pleasure. I'm going to encourage everyone to check out the new edition of the Law School Admission Game. Is this the 6th edition now?
6th edition of the Law School Admission Game. And my blog, lawschoolexpert.com blog, has been now going since 2006. And I do put a lot of info there. So when new things come up, even when the book, I can't come up with a new book in every 2 months. So whenever new things come up, I'm always talking about it there as well.
Awesome. So I'll make sure to link the blog below the video as well as your amazing website, lawschoolexpert.com. Anything else you wanted to share before we wrap up, Anne?
No, I'm glad to be here with you. And I always welcome questions. Both I have contact form on my website and on the blog. So I welcome people reach out, and on TikTok and Instagram at Law School Expert.
Perfect. I'll link those as well. Thanks so much, Anne. It was a pleasure.
Thanks, Dave. Bye.